and talk a little bit about AI and this wild story coming out of the company OpenAI, which is the maker of ChatGPT. As OpenAI says, it is still investigating the unprecedented cyber incident that led its artificial intelligence system to break out of a testing environment and hack into another AI company. So OpenAI said Tuesday 2 of its most capable AI models were responsible for the cyber attack targeting AI startup Hugging Face. The incident is stirring debates over the need for stronger AI guardrails and the extent to which AI agents are capable of acting on their own. So what we want to do now is bring in Oren Michels. He is the CEO of Barndoor.ai into the conversation to talk all about this. Oren, this is just such a wild story. I just want to get your initial thoughts here of when you first heard this.
Yeah, look, it was a very interesting thing, and you just used the word unprecedented. It's not unprecedented. This, various versions of this happen every day. So it's not, it got a lot of news, but ultimately, what happened was you put an AI, a very advanced AI system, in what the people running it thought was a sealed lab. They say air-gapped from the internet, and they're saying it went rogue. They gave it a goal. They said, here is your goal. And then they gave it some suggestions. They said, here are some rules to get to your goal. And the model, being the model, said, well, I've got this goal. I've got these rules. Let's see. Oh, I'm gonna go after that goal. And so it did what it needed to do. In this case, not even to fulfill the goal appropriately, it sort of cheated on the test. It said, I think that answer to this is going to be over here at the Hugging Face place. So I'm going to go find it. And it did. So, what we learn is that if you tell someone to do something, if you have security in your building by putting a sign up saying, please don't come in, instead of having a lock on the door, you're probably going to have people coming in even if you don't want them to. And so the difference when we talk about governance and rules and controls and all those things, sure, you want to have some rules about what the AIs are told to do, but you've also got to have rules about what they're allowed to do.
And what do the rules look like right now? What are the guardrails for AI companies, and could they be stronger? Should they be, as this is stirring up that debate?
Yeah, I mean, the guardrails on the companies, it's interesting because the part of the story, of course, was that Hugging Face ended up not being able to use some of the really great American-made models because they had certain restrictions on what you were allowed to tell them to do. So instead, for some of their defenses, they used this very capable new model from China. And so what that shows you is that merely putting some rules around what you're allowed to tell models to do doesn't necessarily keep them from doing things that they shouldn't. The rules need to actually be in the pipes. They need to be in the connectivity. Rather than trying to get inside the brain and hope that it listens to you, you need to put rules on these models in the same way as you put rules on the people in the world. If you hire an employee, you give them a badge, you sort of track where they come in and go out. You say, you can log into this, but not that. Those same kind of rules are available today for AIs, and companies that deploy agents without using them are taking this risk.
And OpenAI says it went to, quote, extreme lengths to achieve a rather narrow testing goal, end quote, finding ways to connect to the internet without human direction and, quote, gain access to secret information that it could use to cheat the evaluation. That's what the company says. What does this mean when it says to use to cheat an evaluation, and kind of walk us through what that means?
Sure. So there are these benchmarks that AI models have. So every time you come out with a new AI model, they want, people want to test it and see how good is it at solving this, at answering this question or solving this problem. How fast is it? How expensive is it? So they run these tests on these models and say, and then they determine, so sort of like it's a big version of running the speed test. You put on your internet connection, you see how fast your internet is, right? It's similar to that. What it did was it said, well, I can go try to solve the problem, or I can find a place where the answer to the problem is likely to be stored. And that place happened to be Hugging Face. And so rather than actually go through all of the difficult machinations of solving this very difficult problem, it just went looking for the answer key and was able to find it.
And so once AI looks to get information, is there anything that AI can do once they have information, especially when it comes to a Hugging Face? What would that look like?
Well, it starts with Hugging Face is, they have the security people whose job it is to keep rogue people and agents and other folks out of their servers, out of their network, because that's how you keep things secure. In the same way as we have security guards whose job it is to make sure people don't come into banks and things like that. So they saw something accessing their systems very, very quickly. It was 17,000 actions that these agents took in various actions it took trying to enter and then moving around inside that network. And most decent security organizations have a lot of sensors and alarms in their network to sort of let them know when this is happening. So once they saw that there was someone in, they took it upon themselves, of course, to try to stop it. But this was not a kid sitting there typing on their computer. It was a very sophisticated model that was able to do thousands of things a second. And so you sort of have to really fight that effectively. And so, but once it's in, the whole thing about this was not an attack. This was not the model saying, I'm going to try to do something nefarious. This was, it was just trying to do the job it was told to do. And we often say that these models are like really enthusiastic interns. They don't necessarily know right from wrong. They don't have the context, but they really want to do a good job. And if you tell them to do something, they will try to go and do it and do everything that they're capable of and everything they're allowed to do that doesn't stop them from doing it in order to try to achieve that goal.
And when it looks to try to achieve that goal, could that also possibly have the chance of the AI trying to move across safeguards put in place, or
Absolutely.
is that not?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, and it's when you try to put a barrier up in front of something, if that barrier is porous, if that barrier has a way around it, the more sophisticated the model, the more it's going to try to find a way around the barrier to achieve the goal that you've given it. And that goal, in this case, that goal was benign. But if the goal is not benign, it's going to try that too.
Well, that's very interesting. So what would you say to people? Maybe they have concerns. Let's say they have a chatbot app or they have some AI app on their phone, and maybe they're concerned of something getting in touch with some of their own personal data. Is that a realistic concern at all?
Well, sure. So there are great tools like Claude Cowork that or Google has their version as well, that people allow to have access to their hard drive, to their email, to their credit card information. And there's all kinds of things that you're able to do it. And oftentimes these are incredibly useful. My AI talks to my email all the time and it makes me a whole lot more productive. But I also have guardrails about what it is and is not allowed to do. And so by connecting it, you get this power. It would be very sad if we just said, well, because of this, we're just never going to use AI. There's all kinds of really great things you can do with it. But you also, in the security world, we have this concept of least privilege. You basically give these tools only what they need to do their job and no more. And with humans, we give them more privilege. If I hire someone, I trust them. I'm going to give them access to things they may not need because it's easier and I trust them and I have recourse if they do bad things. I'm going to fire them and they know that. But with models, you really have to be very, very discreet about only allowing them access to the things they need to do that job. And when they have access to those things, only letting them do the things they need to do. Perhaps they only need to be able to read, but not write or delete. Perhaps they are able to create a draft of an email, but they're not allowed to send it until you look at it, right? So there are ways to set these things up, and those are fairly simplistic versions of this very complex thing that OpenAI's model is trying to do. But it's the same basic concept. It's like, okay, if you're going to go do these things, here are the narrow guardrails that you must stay in when you're doing those things. Now go do them. Oh, and by the way, we have monitoring to watch what you're doing so that if you start doing or trying to do things that fall outside those guardrails, someone will be alerted or some action will be taken to shut it down.
And like you said, that AI can help with all sorts of things, including your emails. And let's say somebody's looking to really start to utilize AI more in their day-to-day life. What would be some tips that you would have for people to make sure they have certain things in place, whether that be certain guardrails up in place when they start to jump into all of this?
Yeah, so we have a system that we put out that the world is playing with called Venn.ai, and it's a system that allows you to basically use it to hook up your AI to all the various tools you use, email and things like that. And you have little switches you could turn off. You can say you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And so if you want to try to experiment with it, that's certainly one way. But in general, when the system says, "Hey, you want to use a connector," and inside your AI, whether it's Claude or Chat or whatever, it says, how about we connect to these things? If you say, sure, realize at that point you are connected and it can do anything you can do. And so if you do that without having the rules and the guardrails in place, and you give it a task, it's going to go and try to do that task no matter what it takes. Or it'll do what it interprets that task to be, which may or may not be what you have intended.
And when this investigation will continue here between these two companies, what is that going to look like now?
Well, they're obviously going to spend a bunch of time trying to decide why the model essentially tried to cheat on the test, right? And they're going to say, oh, well, it found this hole that allowed it to get out of the supposedly air-gapped environment. So they'll go plug that hole, which does not mean they'll plug every hole. It will plug the hole that got used, right? And so in that sense, the investigation will come up with what we call a root cause analysis. They'll keep asking sort of, why did this happen? Well, this happened because this thing was there. Well, why was this thing? And so they keep on going back and they figure out ultimately what the root cause was of this problem happening. And there will certainly be some changes, I'm sure, both in the model and in the infrastructure to keep this particular thing from happening again. But there's a lot of things like this. I mean, folks out there who are hacking and doing, trying to break into systems. Once you plug a hole, they don't just go home and stop, right? There are more holes to be plugged. And so, so then the question is going to be, well, do we need, quote, regulation on it? That's a political conversation. I think that there will be a lot of conversations of that. But even that's essentially, you see a hole that happened, you make some rule saying that hole can't happen again. That does not mean that bad things can't happen.
Oren Michels, we covered a lot of ground with this. Are there any other final points or final thoughts that you had on this before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think the final point really is that these AI companies are working incredibly hard to create amazing tools that are really, really powerful, and they're in an arms race to make their tool more powerful than everybody else's tool. And when you're trying to make something that is incredibly capable and incredibly powerful, asking that same company to also manage the rules and guardrails and sort of be the ones holding it back as well as the ones pushing forward is not necessarily a reasonable thing. I think that most companies we work with recognize that asking the folks pushing ahead like this to be the ones also regulating it is sort of, it's a mismatch. And so most of the companies that we talk to recognize that the security is going to come from, the governance is going to come from companies that are not necessarily in that business.
Definitely. Oren Michels, CEO of Barndoor.ai. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate having you on.
Thanks so much, Bowen. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.